Welcome to the Faded Hand podcast. I am Greg. This is Joe. This is our first podcast for the new tabletop role-playing game, Faded Hand. So we're just going to be going through, talking about some stuff, things that we like, and why we made them the way we made them. Joe?
Yeah, let's get started. I'm excited to show this off. We've been working on this for a long time.
Okay, so we have our book over here on the right for the viewers at home. So we're just going to start off and we're just going to go through and talk about what Faded Hand is and why it exists. So to me, Faded Hand is a more in-depth strategy-based tabletop role-playing game that adds more realistic elements and more pieces of strategy to combat. Joe, what's Faded Hand really like to you?
Yeah, that is what it is to me, but primarily it's a means to put funny chess pieces on the board. That's really what it is. I just had a scheme that I wanted to put chess pieces on the board, and this is an elaborate plot to make that happen.
If you're wondering exactly what he's talking about with the chess pieces, I'm just going to scroll down here to some of the, specifically the item that allows you to summon a bunch of chess pieces.
I'm sure it's the totem that does it.
Is this ominous totem. Gives you access to a bunch of these spells, and most of them are summoning bishops, knights, rooks, queens.
Actually, every one of them, yeah. Every
All
one
of
of those.
them, yeah.
Every one of those just, they summon the pieces from chess, and that's what the point of that item is.
When we started making this game, Joe said, I'm going to add a chess wizard. And I said, Joe, no one is going to want to play a chess wizard.
They're going to want to play chess. It's good. It's so much fun.
Having played against Chess Wizard as the GM, it was really fun. I admit it was really fun to play against. I really felt like we were playing chess in there, and I think that was cool. So yeah, there's a lot of different stuff. We can just start going through some things in here. Let's just start scrolling down, and the first thing that we get to, so character attributes and skills. So we separate out attributes and skills. What this means, that one's pretty simple. Attributes are things that you're going to want to use out of story, brawn, sleight, mind. Skills are things that you're going to want to use in combat, where such as like your strike, defense, and speed. They relate to each other, but mostly just to differentiate when you're talking about
I
them.
thought we called those stats. I think skills are these things like intimidation, toughness. Attributes are like your numbers.
You are correct. That is true. Skills, attributes are like these numbers right here. Skills are these things over here. So, we have a lot less of these than other tabletop role-playing games such as D&D. We'll refer to a lot of comparisons between D&D and our game, not because we don't like D&D, but because we love D&D, and you always have to critique the things that you like because those are what you interact with the most. So, Joe, why do we have less skills?
Well, the reason we have less skills is mainly to avoid having useless skills. It just feels shitty as a player to invest in a skill, like to spend your point in it, and then like never find the opportunity to use those skills. And so we've tried to only make skills that we're sure are going to see use. That's why you don't see animal handling here, for example. Because who's going to pick animal handling? There's never going to be it just doesn't feel good to take animal handling, so it's not here. So we went with 4 skills per attribute, with the exception of brawn, because we just couldn't think of a 4th skill. There will probably be one at some point. The game is merely in beta, so there will be advancements.
Yeah. So that's kind of why we have the skills that we have. Next up, skill checks. Skill checks in Faded Hand use cards. You use cards instead of rolling dice. Joe, why do we have it like that?
Well, the main thing is that the dice are fun to roll physically, but they have this problem where your game needs to have unpredictability and randomness, but the game also needs to be a game where players make choices. Because a game where you don't make choices is more like a story. And the problem that I really have with the D20 system, and this is my biggest beef with it, is that there's nothing that you can do about the D20 roll. Like, you roll it and you win or lose, and then your turn's over and you gotta just wait. And it's pretty unsatisfying most of the time. Like, even if you hit it, you don't really feel like you did a lot. But you wouldn't want to just let the player have anything more reliable than that, because otherwise they just like always hit their opponent or always fail to hit their opponent. So we were really struggling with this ability, with this idea of trying to give the player some control over the randomness without giving them too little control. And that's when we hit upon the idea of the player sort of having like a hand of rolls, right? Or a hand of cards. I mean, like if you had a hand of cards, you would draw so many cards, and then you could play a card, and that would take the place of your roll in that interaction. But of course, because you have several cards in your hand, you can kind of choose when you want to expend your best effort and when you want to just give your minimum effort. So on average, you still get the same distribution of power, but you get just the slightest amount of control over where you play it, and it helps you feel like you're actually in control as the player.
And one thing that I also really love about this system is that I think it actually provides really good role-playing advantages in role-playing, because if you're playing a big bruiser kind of guy, and so you don't really care about making knowledge or investigation checks, and so you can just choose not to try as hard on those, and then occasionally work really hard in intimidation or anything like that. Or it can be fun to play the opposite, where you're going to have good brawn, but then you don't have to work hard in your intimidation, toughness, athletics checks, because you can actually physically put more effort into investigation, into knowledge, into perception, where you can role-playing wise choose to put more effort, take more time to look through a room, look through the room or do something else related to that, or read through a book with a knowledge check or something like that. And I really like that role-playing wise.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it's cute. I think it's cute strategically that like choosing to not focus on certain skill checks sort of gives a shadow buff to your later skill checks that you will focus on. The ability of having this like focus mechanic that's not explicitly in the rules, I just think that's fun.
I agree.
And this has been tested, so it is actually fun when you play it.
Yeah. So next, let's just briefly touch on the hand cards and their values. Kind of like why we have them this way.
Yeah, so we've got you drawing cards, and those cards take the place of your dice roll. So each card you play adds a certain amount of power to your roll, but that power doesn't equal the power like on its face. Like if you draw like a 5, that's not worth 5 points. And there's this table that maps the actual cards to the power that you get from it. The reason why we have this table, I understand that you have to remember it, and it's a little bit annoying. But we wanted to compress the values down a little bit. We felt like making people add like 20 points in their head from like their card and then their skills. I feel like the numbers getting really big would just be annoying, and that it would be better to just bring it down to like 1 through 4.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. One thing that's also nice though is that we do have this is still in beta, so I haven't actually put this on the website yet. We have a cheat sheet that I think that every player should have. It's by no means required, but I really think it's helpful. It has this table on it, so that if you're ever looking at your hand and you forget, you can just quickly look down and have that. It also does some stuff in combat for magical field effects and things like that. But yeah. I agree. This table makes things a lot easier, because doing like 17 plus 8, sure, you can do it, it's 25, but it's it's a lot easier to do 4 plus 1 is 5. You know what I mean? And
so
condenses the results.
If you're the kind of person who cares about this is really close to being like your card value mod 4 minus 1 is really close to what it is. And if you want to think about it that way, that's fine. It's not completely that because of the 0 values and because the king is the only plus 4 card, but it's more or less we cut the 13 card sections into 4 plus 1 divisions.
Yeah. And the system actually also helps a lot with the GM guide, who the GM doesn't use cards unless they're specifically using something special. They use a D12 most of the time, and this very conveniently breaks this down to work almost perfectly into 12 responses.
That's a good point. After we talk about the book, we've got to do a just talk over on GM details.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so that's hand cards and skill checks and things like that. Top deck checks, those are just somebody goes to shove you and you had no idea. You didn't. Those in effect mean that you couldn't choose to focus or not on whether something happened to you or not, because like I don't choose to fall over. It's just, was I standing in a strong stance? Was I doing something else? That's what that is. Effectively a saving throw, similar. Mid combat checks, similar to a regular check. You just don't use your whole hand. Next we get into combat. Probably most of what we'll be talking about will be combat, just because that's really what a lot of the game is. You don't need a lot of rules on how to tell a story with your friends. You do need rules on how to make sure that you're actually playing Fated Hand versus doing make-believe.
Yeah, if you you can do like playground, no blocking, no dodging with any rules. So, you don't really need us to give you rules for that.
Yeah. So here we'll go through the combat statistics. We'll tell you what these kind of represent. First up is your strike. This is how easy it is to hit your opponent. This is modified by multiple different things, but it's effectively how easily you can hit your opponent. Sounds pretty simple. Defense. How hard it is for someone to not only strike you, but actually kill you. I can just go and hit Joe like that, but it's a lot more difficult for me to actually fully hit him and knock him unconscious, severely injure, or anything like that. Speed. This one is very important. I think that people will undervalue speed until they actually play the game. Speed is how quick your reactions are in combat. How quickly you're looking around the battlefield saying, oh, this is what I want to do. This is what's going on. I can act now. Versus being dazed and not realizing exactly what's going on and taking a second. That's what speed is. Yeah, so Joe, why do we have these three skills, and kind of like what are their benefits versus having AC and things like that?
Honestly, AC, I don't want to dog on. Look, I don't want to dog on D&D too much. I love D&D. I play D&D all the time. AC is really weird. Because when you look at AC, you think it's your like armor value or your dodge value, and it determines how hard it is to hit you. But the way it turns out, it's actually still typically not that hard to hit you, just because the distributions of stat rolls, like 1 point of AC is not really worth a whole lot. Typically, either you're going to be facing like big monsters, you're going to be facing small monsters that have a not high chance to hit you, or you're going to be facing bosses who are going to roll huge rolls and just blow past your AC every time. And actually, I think it's impossible to talk about this without getting into our next point, hit points.
Oh, yes.
Every character in this game, almost every character in this game, has only one hit point. You only have to be hit once and you die. And you only have to hit the enemy once and they die. This is because this is kind of to lean a little towards realism. Like in real life, if you stab someone, you've won. Like you've really won.
They're not moving.
Yeah. Like they're probably going to wriggle around, but once you get your first killing blow, like they're going to have a tough time unless you're like tangled up with knives, and there are rules to govern this as well. But in general, you get someone with a good stick, and that's kind of the end of the story. That's the end of them actually fighting you, right? And it just makes combat more tense when instead of having 50 hit points and you lost 25, you have 1 hit point, and any turn could be the last turn. So, given the fact that we have 1 hit point, the stats start to make more sense. Strike, if you have a high strike value when you hit someone, you're gonna have a easier time overwhelming their defense value and get that hit that kills them. And conversely, a high defense value makes it so that other people have to have a very high strike value to overwhelm you and kill you. And speed, we felt like running with 2 stats would be, because I think strike and defense came in. We had the +2 idea pretty early, right?
Those were very.
The speed idea didn't come in until much later because we knew we wanted to have something We don't want to have something that was related to like your agility or something. Like you need an agility stat, right?
Yeah.
It's the separate from your strike ability. But it wasn't clear how to make that behave. And then we had on this idea of the initiative countdown, which we'll talk about in a second. And actually, I forget how we came exactly to that idea, right?
Yeah, so I think that the way that we came about the initiative idea, I think that we came up with strike and defense, or I think we called it attack and defense at the time.
Yeah.
Strike and defense first, and then we were looking at how we wanted initiative to behave, and we didn't like the stagnant, okay, Joe goes first, then Greg, then the other person, then the other person. And so then we were like, how do we randomize that? And at first, we were just rolling a D12. We just rolled a D12 every round. But then we wanted some people to be able to go faster because they
we're like, how would you try? We're like, you should be able to try on this as well. And that's how we came.
That's when we came.
It was like, oh, you can put a card down for this. So yeah, you can invest a card. You can invest a card to try to move earlier in the round, and that's really powerful because this is a one-hit game. This is a one-hit game, so if you move early in the round and kill someone, that's not just like, oh, they're going to back at you later. You've actually saved yourself and maybe totally changed the battle by going early. So speed's actually very valuable.
Yeah, so speed is very valuable, and I think that we've done a fair bit of playtesting on this, and I would say one thing that every single person loves about the game is the initiative order. The way initiative works is just, it's so clean, it's so much fun. The way initiative works, this is probably
honestly, let's just skip stances for now. Let's go talk about initiative.
Yeah, let's go talk about initiative sometime. I don't know quite where it is.
Yeah,
initiative order, right here. So, the way it works, battles in Fated Hand comprise of a linear series of turns. Pretty standard. Each round, every participating creature will have the opportunity to take at least one turn, unless you die. During a creature's turn, you typically move, attack, cast magic, perform other things. In order to determine which creatures take their turn is not fixed, determined by initiative countdown. Top of the round, GM will begin to count from a sufficiently high number, often 10 or 15. GM has counted down to the value at or below creature's speed. That creature may take its turn. Important note about this, they do not have to take their turn. They can take their turn.
So what this means is that the GM will, on every turn, you'll get some time to plan out your moves and pick what cards you want to do, and generally come up with your plan, and you'll set your stance, which we haven't talked about yet. But then you'll compute your speed in your brain. You'll be like, okay, I've got a speed of 12. I've got a speed of 8, right? And then the GM will be like, 15, 14, 10, 12, and when he counts down to 8, you can just slap your hand on the table and be like, I'm going, and then now your turn happens. So it's very tense, because you don't know who's going to go when. It's all determined by speed. And the monsters participate in this system too. So the monsters have a speed, and the GM keeps track of that.
And so usually this will end up having so that the players will go before the monsters, but that doesn't really matter that much, because...
Yeah, ties are broken by whoever yells first. And obviously the players are going to be more ready to yell, because the GM has to count. And this gives a small advantage to the players, and we're happy with that.
We're fine with that. And so that is... I've been the GM multiple times for all of the playtests, and every time that is the most fun thing is counting down in the order. And we also try to one thing is that during what we call the planning phase, which is when you play your cards, count up your totals, do things like that, we try and minimize table talk between the players, because we like the concept that you don't always know. You're jiggling the camera a little bit.
Oh.
You don't always know what your friends are going to do and how they're going to play, right? If we're playing two soldiers, I don't know, as I'm attacking someone else, I don't know if Joe is going to be attacking another guy, what his plan are, what he's seeing, and minimizing on table talk makes that a little bit more realistic, and I think it makes it really fun, especially when the GM is counting down and they say 12, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, and all the players are making eye contact with each other, looking around and wondering who's going to be able to go first. How's this battle going to play out? And it's always really scary when the GM counts down to a pretty high number, like 12 or 13, and then they say that a monster goes first.
Yeah.
And the players realize that they haven't even gone yet, and a monster's already moving.
Well, especially that means oftentimes that their plan for what they want to do is just scuttled. Because it's hard to change your plan.
Yeah, so that's initiative. Probably one of my favorite things, honestly. Just it's so simple. It's so much fun. I really love the way initiative works. Oh, so we should go through the planning phase just really quickly.
Yeah.
So the planning phase. So let's say that so the adventurers are walking through a town, and then some bandits jump out. The GM says, "Okay, enter combat, enter the planning phase." So then people will begin. They will discard. They'll have a story hand. They'll discard that story hand, and they'll draw 4 new cards. Then they'll enter the planning phase. This is your combat hand. And if it's a magic character, they'll have their alternate hand. So then they will, minimize tabletop strategy. Try to plan out what you're going to be able to do. During the planning phase, you are going to choose a stance. We'll talk about that after this. And you'll put down your 3 cards. So this means that you will be able to save 1 card. So you can either choose to, let's say you draw a king. You can either choose to save this king so that later if you see an opportunity, you'll be able to play that down and then take advantage of it. Or let's say you draw a 2. You might want to save that 2 so that you don't have to use it this round, and you can choose to do something else with it later. Or perhaps battle will end before you ever even have to use that 2. You won't have to take that plus a 0, something like that. So you'll put these down into your strike, speed, and defense, and then you will add up those numbers, taking your stance, your weapon, your everything like that. That goes into the character sheet, so it's less numbers than I'm saying right now. And then you'll organize your D12 so that you have the right value, so you don't have to keep everything in your head. That's actually one thing that I really want to harp on, is that we try to minimize the amount of off-the-board things.
Oh, yeah. It's gotta be on the board.
Gotta be on the board. What this means is that, let's say I'm poisoned, right? You can buy for D&D and other things like that, little like markers and things like that can go on your mini or whatever that say like, okay, this thing is poisoned. But unless you're gonna buy those, which buying things is annoying and nobody likes buying things, that's money. You can pretty easily forget that your character's poisoned. If you forget, no fault of your own, or the GM forgets, well, suddenly you're not really poisoned, and that's just kind of the way it is. The GM's managing a lot. They don't always remember every tiny thing, especially when there are a lot of things going on.
And to be honest, I think a lot of people might think, well, that's not so bad, because normally poison and web and slow effects, those don't get too out of hand. But that's because people don't typically use too many of them, because they're a pain to keep track of. Like, imagine if you made a character, you wanted to make an effect character, and you got him some web slinging ability, and he had a poison dagger, and then he had a spell that caused blindness, and you had 50 effects you were just always putting on people. You would make the other players mad with how many stupid effects you were making them remember. And that's because every effect is its own little bespoke thing, and it has no feature in the gameplay other than in the minds of the players, and that makes the players remember stuff, and people hate remembering things. That's not fun. So we have a system that unifies all those and makes them way easier to remember by making you not remember them. Should we get into that right now, or should we finish talking about?
I want to talk about the planning phase first. I want to talk about stances first before we talk about...
stances, yeah.
So then you calculate all your values, and then once you're all done with that, you kind of look up. Usually the GM will say, everybody ready? Everybody said yes, and then combat can continue. So we've touched on stances. So let's talk about what stances are, what they do, and what they represent. So, Joe, I want you to kind of take the lead on this one.
Yeah.
So here's the section about stances. Joe, take over.
So your stance is a combat feature. So it's combat only. And your stance is one of the things that you get to exclusively control every turn. Every turn you pick a stance. You pick it during the planning phase of the turn. And there are 3 stances you can pick from. There's aggressive stance, defensive stance, and evasive stance. And
we're considering changing
evasive
stance
it's going to be called
quick stance?
Or was it mobile stance? I forget. We had a great choice.
It was either mobile or quick.
Swift stance?
No, we didn't like Swift.
We didn't like Swift.
We didn't like Swift.
It's alliteration.
It's alliteration, and we're trying to avoid...
The name might change, but the feature will not.
Yeah, it's either going to be evasive, quick, or mobile. One of those three.
It'll be the one that lets you move, okay? It won't be that hard to remember. But basically, the stance is what you get to really control. You always have all three accessible to you. And the stances grant a pretty significant modifier to your stats. So look at the table here. Aggressive stance gives you +2 strike, but gives you -2 defense. And it does nothing to your speed. Defensive stance does the reverse. It gives you -2 strike, but +2 defense. And evasive stance gives you -2 to both. The question would be, what the hell is it for? The other thing that they do is affect your movement cost, which I will explain in a second. But the point of the stance is that the stance kind of forces you into a plan. By forcing you to pick a stance, you notice how there's no neutral stance. There's no stance that doesn't give you a negative in something. The stances force you to pick a plan. Your plan needs to be to either attack or defend. Not like a wishy-washy mix of both, unless you play your cards in a way to really create that. If you pick aggressive stance, you've sort of locked yourself into wanting to attack, and if you pick defensive stance, you've sort of locked yourself into preferring not to attack and instead control some space. And this helps keep the game. This helps guide the players down the road of actually doing something, and avoids overmuch thinking at the time of your turn. That's the main point of it.
Yeah, so one thing that this is, if you've been keeping track, there are quite a few things that go into your end strike, defense, and speed numbers. And normally, one thing that we also tried to change is how long people's turns are. One thing that kind of annoyed us, now this could just be our group, but I feel like I've heard about it in a lot of other, gaming groups, is it reaches somebody's turn and they go, okay, what do I want to do? And they're looking around, they're looking at the board, and that, to me, brings gameplay kind of to a halt.
The turns take a long time even if you act promptly, especially D&D. Again, not to dog on D&D. The dice rolls take a while, because a dice roll has like a lot of fanfare to it. People love to watch it roll.
Which is
the
fine.
dice rolls take a while, and there's 2 dice rolls per attack if you hit it. You roll this, and then you're like, oh, I got a hit, and you got to look for your D12 and your D6. And you're like, oh, I got a bonus action bite attack, and you got to throw your bite attack too. Like, there's a lot of rolls to your one attack, and then if you have multi-attack, you're like, it takes a long time to just do the rolls, so we don't need thinking time added on. So this game really tries to make you plan, and then kind of stick to that plan, where you're not forced to do whatever you wanted to do during your planning phase, but you have to set so many stats. You have to set so many stats and set your stance that by the time your turn comes around, you've probably got a very small number of real options, and you just have to go with one.
Which I also really like from a realistic standpoint, because realistically, if, let's say you and I are sparring together,
yeah,
right, I choose how, let's say I'm holding like a rapier or something like that, or a sword. I choose how I hold that, and I choose how I approach
you get set up, but by the time I'm like already moving, like I gotta react. You just gotta parry. Like, it's the only choice.
There's no changing that I can do. I can't, like, if I'm holding my sword like this or something, right? If I'm holding it like this, I can't suddenly be holding it like this to do something better. I already chose to hold it a certain way.
Yep.
So there's nothing that I can do, and that affects it. That affects how the attack or defense is going to be. And I really like that part of it. And since everyone gets the planning phase at the same time of combat, everybody's thinking of, what do I want to do, happens at the same time. So it honestly doesn't matter if the planning phase is a solid minute and a half, because each person's turn is at most going to be 20-30 seconds, hopefully.
Everyone thinks together and then plays their turns quickly.
Which I really like.
And I think this works. Like, I'm a long turn taker, I'm a long turn guy, and my turns in Fated Hand go quick too.
Yeah. And even when if I'm controlling, let's say, usually like 4 or 5 monsters. Yeah, that's about fair. If I'm controlling 4 or 5 monsters, the GM has an entirely separate thing that we'll probably do more videos about later. If I'm controlling 4 or 5 monsters, each one of their turns honestly goes pretty quickly. Because I already have their values, I can pretty much say, all right, I attack you, strike value 6, 5, 7, blah, blah, blah. Okay, hit, miss. And then that's done. Like, it's pretty snappy, and I really like that. So yeah, those are stances and kind of an overview of the planning phase.
It's probably time to cut for an episode.
Yes, it is. So we're about the 30-minute mark. this is the end of the first podcast. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again.